All right, here we go. This is day 4 of Weekend's Web App, and we're about to get stuck into things. If you are following along at home and you've pulled down the repo, you can get to the same code base that I am about to start off with git checkout day 3. Also, I now have fixed chat. My main problem was I was running Firefox, and unfortunately, not every web development effort out there seems to support every single browser, and I didn't notice that chat was broken, but chat should now be working. So if you try to holler at me with questions or anything like that, I should see them now. Anyway, we shall get into things. So today, we're going to be handling route error handling, essentially. So this probably deserves a little bit of explanation. We'll just talk about where we're at, and then we will do a bit of a sketch to show what I'm intending to do with this hour, and then we'll go from there. All right. So I'll just get the server running up so we can look at where we're running now. Put this off to another window, and now we'll load up our browser. Okay, so we have ourselves a set of routes. Anything that's local should go to a route, like the About page, the Home page, and then entry 1, entry 2, and entry 3. And we rigged up some sort of a delay, which means that the app, if it immediately gets what it needs to, it can jump straight over to it. But otherwise, it will take its time, fade out the view, and then head on straight in. And that's all very well and good. But now what we want to do is we want to deal with some bad cases. So at the moment, we don't have any logic when you end up somewhere where there is nothing. It just falls straight through it, doesn't render any sort of 404 page or anything like that. Likewise, it will not have anything to do if we were to say, let me think about how we do this. Okay, so in our application code, if we were to say with these entries here, if we were to instead reject this or have some sort of error happen, so say we had some sort of error happen, so we'll, instead of doing this set timeout, we will reject with a new error. Just any old error, doesn't really matter. So if we reject with that error, we'll see what happens. I don't actually know what will happen, but it probably won't be. Yeah, so we got that rejection, but then it has no idea what to do. And what should probably render is some sort of error page, because it got rejected. Like the promise got rejected, which means we didn't actually get the things that we need to render this page. So we should deal with that case. So that's what we're going to work through now. But first, I'll just take a brief chat about how this error handling progression should probably go. Right, so let's jump over to our sketchboard. Right, and we are on day 4. Okay, so when you load a route, okay, cool. So when you load a route, you've got a series of links all about. And when you click those links, something will happen to get you to the next route. And we've already sort of talked about that, but there are a number of places where a failure can occur while we're loading the route. So the first place where failure can occur is through matching. So this is sort of ignoring the fact that, yes, there could be exceptions. We could write things incorrectly and end up with breaks, but that's sort of like once we've locked down this code, there shouldn't ever be any errors in this place because we'll have tested it to the point of bulletproof. So the only error that we really need to handle at this point in the process should be the case of a route no match. So in that case, it should go straight to some sort of 404 page, a not found. Now, unfortunately, it now gets more complicated. So if we do have a match, yeah. Okay, so if we do have a match, now I think this slows down a bit when I'm streaming because I've turned off smooth, which makes it a bit nicer to work with. But unfortunately, it's still a bit laggy. Anyway, we will soldier on. So the next phase after matching is your preload. So now, in this preload state, we should get we fire off the function, and we receive a promise back, or it crashes immediately. There's a bunch of things that could happen, but essentially, most of the time, it's going to that promise is going to turn over, and then that promise will eventually come back with either a rejection, or it will come back with a load, and it's fine. Oh, sorry, it will resolve is the correct term. So if it resolves, then we're good to go to view render. And while we could see an error here, especially if we like some bug slips into the code, it's less likely to happen. At this point, you're essentially guaranteed not to have a 404, and the only kind of errors are going to be ones based on programming error out of here. So we've got programmer error as a primary cause of death out of the view render. Otherwise, we're good to go. We just keep on going through and we're done. So I just sort of glanced over what happens at this preload state. So that's the main thing we need to talk about here. So at that preload state, out could come a crash, which means either programmer error, server breakdown, like a gateway timeout. There are a whole lot of things that could happen that are sort of out of our control, and we can't necessarily identify them, but we might have some information about them. So a crash is the worst case scenario, but there are some failures here that do make sense to happen, such as a 404, as in we couldn't find the entry and we need to render a 404 instead. There also might be access forbidden. So these are sort of our failure cases out of that. We need to handle these, and then most likely what will happen is, so when we click a view, we create a little container, right? And that container is what this view render will go into. But if something goes wrong, what should probably happen is instead of putting the view into this container, one of these error views will end up in the container instead. So instead we have a broken container here, but it's still the one that we intended to sort of use, and it ends up going into that container. So yeah, this is the same as this, is I guess my point. So that container will essentially, in the end, it will either contain the actual view or the page that tells you that something went wrong. Now, so the timing for this is, this route no match should be instant. This will happen after some sort of a delay, and then we'll get onto the container. So this covers sort of our error cases, and there's one other thing I want to briefly talk about, and it has to do with essentially the fact that things take time. So let me jump on over here. I'll delete this error first, so we get everything working as intended. So even with no crashes, there's still some undefined behavior happening here, or like not necessarily the cleanest of behavior happening. So if you were to refresh this and work your way through, so if we click this, you notice it takes about 1 second to do. If If I click home, it's immediate. Now, any of these ones with delays, technically I can keep on clicking these links, right? And you'll notice that that changes over for each one of them. So 3, 2, 1. So there is a problem here where once things are in motion, we can't cancel, we can't do anything. We want to figure out what it is that happens. And like this is a really common pattern where, you know, if you're browsing a web page and it's slow, you stop it, you go somewhere else, right? Well, do we have some means of, if say you hit the back button, you don't like where you're going, like say here. So if we click entry 1 and then hit back, we're on home, but then entry 1 is going to load here, see? So there are things that we have to take care of here in order to do this properly. Because see, we're technically on home even though that thing loaded there. So there's this case where it's like if you abort, you need to figure out what to do as well. And this is where it gets interesting. So now we're talking about aborting this process. So how should we probably do that? And I guess the question is if I were to, I'll just scoot on down a bit. So here now we're looking at a timeline of a start point. So that start point, we will have a preload. It will be instant if this route doesn't match. So we don't have to worry about that. The sort of a second click happening in that time space. There isn't actually time for the user to be able to do that because the JavaScript is all executing and it's all synchronous at that point. So there's no delay at all. But if we go from there to start, then start at the preload. And then we end preload somewhere over here. Right, and then we have render here. Okay, so if we click a link, let's put one over here, and we've got a link here. Let's say we click this link, and it got to about here, and then we decided to click this one. Well, what should happen to the container or the concept of this one here? If we haven't hit the end of preload, we should probably just discard it. And, you know, eventually we might even cancel. Like we could just let it trail away, but eventually we could sort of cancel it while we go ahead and get this one going. Once we've ended preload, everything's actually a bit simpler because the render happens almost immediately after. And at that point you can hit back and it's fine. So the main thing is we need to deal with what happens in this middle case. And what will probably end up happening is keeping track of a view that is currently being loaded. And if the route changes during this, we'll just have to say, all right, we're now going to discard that concept. We're not going to be listening to that anymore. Or I don't know how we're going to keep track of it just yet, but we'll evolve our code to get to that point. And then we will just sort of discard it. So we won't even try and stop the requests to start off with. We will just say, all right, we're going to ignore that container now, and then we're going to go on to the next one. And that will hopefully allow us to keep track of things in a fairly safe manner. And, you know, potentially what we can do is just check what the current route is once we get to this point here, and then decide whether to act on it at that point. So I think that's sort of where we're going to be going to deal with that particular problem. So we've got a few things to deal with, and we've got 45 minutes to do it. So let's get stuck into it. Take a quick drink first. All right, let's go. So, we should hopefully not have to change this too much, but we will need to have some sort of render error view or something like that. So let's take a look at that first. Not the routing text, not the routing index. Okay, so just going to make our way down here. And first of all, let's deal with the absolute first case, which is if we do not find anything. Okay. So here we know, so this is a sum function. If we want to just look at it really quickly on MDN. So the sum method tests whether at least one element in the array passes the test test implemented by the provided function. Now, I guess the interesting thing with this is, so I'm sort of abusing it just a little bit. I'm running route sum because I know that the behavior of this is that it won't continue to execute after it hits one thing that it wants to execute. So the moment something returns true, it actually stops working over the rest of it. So I'm sort of like not using it correctly. I'm relying on an implementation detail there. But I'm pretty sure it's an implementation detail that will not change anytime soon. And if I wanted to change this for myself, I could turn it into a for loop. But anyway, now with that route found aspect here, it does mean that I can be very certain that if the route is not found, I will be able to I will be able to catch that here. So let's make that real clear, shall we? So if route not found, remember that exclamation point is shorthand for not. If not route found, then we will just put out a console error for now. So route not found for path, and that path, where is it? It is, trouble finding it. Oh yeah, current location, there we go. So if we jump over here and we put in some completely unfound one, you can see route not found for path, EOA there, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't matter. Now, what are we going to do in that case? Well, we've already built a container out, and you'll see that if we look in main view, we can see data route path, and it's waiting for whatever it is that we're going to render. We never render anything though. But what we could do is call up some sort of generic error view and go from there. Now, usually though, we would want the application to be able to define what that error view looks like. So if we pulled that out of this router code, maybe what we need, so on the route stack, we've got this concept of routes. What if we had a render error function, right? Yeah, so we have a render error function that is pretty much like the view render function. Yeah, it is a view render function that will not, no params. Actually, no, it will have params, and we will send parameters into it, such as what kind of error this is, like, is it a 404, is it a server crash, is it, like, what kind of error is it? And we'll use those parameters to render the function. To render the view. So if we were to go to app.ts, so we've got this concept of a route stack, and unfortunately it's failing its type now because it's missing render error. So let's just make a function that does just that, and we'll just put it in line here for the moment. We'll come up with something smarter down the track, but for now we can just be a bit dumb. So HTML element and params, which is any for now, any type. And we'll figure out something a little stricter down the track for that. Okay, so we're going to take this view in a HTML, and we're just going to put in the basics here. So if params, we'll use the standard HTML error codes. Sorry, not HTTP error codes rather. So if we come up across one that we recognize, we're going to be specific. Otherwise, we'll go unspecified error. And since we're definitely not going to see this in production, we may as well just output the parameters. So we'll do JSON stringify params, and that'll give us a nice view where we can actually debug whatever's happening down the track. But for this one, we'll just do a straight 404 error. Right. So with this render error function, what we should now be able to do is if we jump into this route not found, what we're going to do is we'll take the route stack, we will render error into, where are we looking? View element. New view container, my bad. So new view container and the parameters for it. So this type of error will be of code 404. Number is not assignable to string. It's meant to be all strings on the params. Right, okay. That's okay, we'll do that. It doesn't have to be a number type. JavaScript numbers can't do integers anyway. Not properly anyway. Right. So that becomes a 404 error. All very good. Now, what we want to do is try and blow up one of our route functions and see if we can catch that as a server error. Or not a server error, but as a general crash, and then have a unspecified error come out of it. So let's blow up one of our routing functions. Let's blow up one of the slugs here. So instead, we're going to reject new error. Yeah, new error. This is the error, the entry route error. And I'm going to see if I can get that error out on that page, because if I can get it on that page, then that's potentially going to be helpful for us down the track as we're developing, and then eventually we can provide some decent error handling for just pretty much anything that could happen in our code base, which it's beneficial to us, although some errors we might want to bury if they're not going to cause an end to everything. Right, I'll deal with this, get rid of that. Okay, so we've got an immediate rejection happening when this comes in, and we want to see how we handle it. All right, let me just do a refresh, make sure I got new code. Okay, I click error and something happens. So it's an uncaught promise. We don't know, like we don't actually do anything with it. Well, we could do something with it because we've got this concept of a promise. So then result equals something. But what if it's a rejection? So then we have a concept of an error there. So going back to what is the API for a promise, so or rather the then of a promise. So when you use a then function on a promise, it might give me a signature here. There we go. Okay. So yeah, this is really long, but essentially there's a then. So that's the result, and this one is so the first parameter. Let me think of the best way to. Yeah, on fulfilled, and then on rejected. So that's the two arguments. So essentially, in other words, good thing, bad thing. What do you do in case of the good thing? What do you do in case of the bad thing? If you don't do anything in case of the bad thing and you send that promise somewhere, then then the next promise up the chain can try and deal with it. But in this case, we want to deal with this. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to add ourselves an error function, and this one is going to render do our route error. And I'll just drop a console log in there. And I have a feeling our stringify will not work too well. But let's just say, for now, that we're just going to do a 500, which is a server error. And we're going to add the error object. We don't need to do that. We can do that shorthand. Yeah, so we're just going to do this on this promise now. Okay, so here we got an unspecified error, but we didn't actually get the error object. And that is because, unfortunately, it's not going to play ball with JSON stringify. So we might have to do something a little more intelligent there. but that's fine. We can play with this. And the main reason we need to play with this actually is because there can be more than one type of error. There can be 404s, as said before, 403s. There's things that is a server error, or just any other error, which is just a standard new error potentially. Whatever it is, we sort of need to deal with it. So it's important that we have a wider gamut of what kind of bad results can come back, and then what do we do with those bad results. So what we can potentially do, I'm just going to take a moment to again revise some notes, because I don't want to do this, I don't want to lead anyone astray. But what we're going to be doing is looking at making a few custom errors to cover those 404 cases and all those sorts of bits and pieces. So just give me one moment to check my notes, and then we'll go from there. That will do. Okie dokie. I mean, I probably could have just done this, but I don't want to lead anyone astray. So we're just going to chuck some errors in here, and I'll eventually pull them out somewhere that's a bit more useful. So not found error. And I think we'll go for request not found as opposed to, or rather, we'll go data not found, just because I don't want it to necessarily be specific to a HTML request, but eventually maybe we'll have a differentiation between whether the server says no versus our IndexedDB says no, or something like that. But I don't really want to think too far ahead of this, because that feels like over engineering to start off with. But what we'll do is we'll go data not found error. So the name of this error is a data not found error, and the constructor for it has a read-only message string, and then a public. We won't add anything else. We'll just go for a message with it, and we just need to put a super for the message in there. All right. So data not found is a possible error. Data forbidden is a possible error. This guy, oh no, it was because it was duplication name. Okay, so data forbidden error is another potential error, and again, we will just this will be a fairly basic example to start off with, but eventually we'll get something a bit more interesting here. Okay, so yes, what shall we do here? Okay. So what we want to do with those errors is pass them down the line somehow, so that we can demonstrate the idea of a preload function sending back a failure of some description. So what we'll do is we will jump into our router here, and I'm just going to jump up here into routing. I need to do that. Give us a bit more space to chuck some more in there, and we'll grab a data not found error and the data forbidden error. Cool. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to fix this. Actually, yeah. No, I'm going to fix it, and then I'm going to check out how the shape of these params look. I mean, it should look just like a slug. Yeah, slug entry one. There we go. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically do some checks. We're not going to check any data source or anything like that, because there is no data source. But what we're going to do is something really facile, where we go const valid entries. All right. So entry 1, 2. Okay. Forbidden entries. We're going to make entry free forbidden just for fun. And then anything else is going to be not found. And all of them are going to come on that delay as well. So everything that happens, even the not founds, will take. Let's drop this down because I'm getting tired of waiting 3 seconds for it. We'll drop it down to 2 seconds, and then we'll use that as our sort of our logic. So instead of doing the set timeout on the resolve, we're going to do the set timeout, and then we're going to run a function on the inside of it. Okay, so yeah, if the params.slog, or rather if valid entries.index of, so I'll just quickly explain this index of function. I might have done it in a previous stream, but pays to bring it up again because we'll be using it a lot. Index of is a way to find essentially whether something is, whether an item is in an array. So if we were to play with it real quickly here, let me do completely different numbers just to demonstrate the point. So if I was to go index of, say, 20 here, it will run through these, run equality checks on them, very simple equality checks on them, and then find the one that it matches, and then get the index number of it. So if we were to look at that array there, you can see item 0 is 10, item 1 is 20, item 3 is 30, item 2 is 30, item 3 is 40, item 4 is 50. So it's 0 indexed. Now, the benefit of this index of is you can find out whether something is in it or not, because if you give it something that it doesn't find, it gives you -1 as a response. And potentially we'll bind a constant to index none to make that really clear, or index none or something like that. But for the moment, we'll just keep in mind, I mean, like, even if I was to put in a constant that allows us to go something like, which I see in some places, like, and this is such an idiom, it's present in all JavaScript code, so you've sort of got to get used to reading it. Anyway, coming back to that. So if this is, there's no valid entries, that's what this is. So if it does not equal -1, then that means there must have been a valid entry in there, in which case we should be able to resolve safely. So let's do that. Now, if not, else, if forbidden entries does not equal -1, then that means we ended up on entry 3. We must have ended up on something within this array. And just for good measure, we'll chuck in entry 4 there, just to make the point across. So if we land here, then that means we have an error. So let's make ourselves a data forbidden error here. Where am I going? There we go. Okay, so let's make ourselves a data forbidden error, and could not be accessed. Let's just do that. Cool. Okay. Now, what next? Finally, we've got the else. So now we know that we couldn't find any valid entries. We couldn't find any forbidden entries that we were going to give it back a forbidden response to. And finally, we have not found. And then finally, so yeah, the else. So we should, yeah, we cannot possibly end up outside of this else, this if statement, because of this final else that has no conditions on it. So that should be enough code for us to do something with. And let's just see what happens without any custom handling, what actually comes out of this. So if we go to home and click on entry 3, we've got the delay, and then we added a data forbidden error. Notice it didn't pull this out, so we've left something out in how we handle this. But yeah, we've got that unspecified error, and it pulled the name out of it, but it didn't pull out the message, so we need to address that. Right. And also you'll notice the error code is still that unspecified error because we haven't handled that in any particular way. What we can also do is try a random entry, and we've still got that delay, and then we've got a data not found error. So technically it works, but we're not doing the right things to handle it. So let's get to doing just that. I'm really sorry. I should have moved that a bit so that you could actually see what the hell was going on. I know part of that code just went down with it behind my head. I will try to be more mindful. I might block off that part of the screen so that I don't act like you can see what I can see. All right. So if we're going back over to the router here, now we have our error handling here. Now what's missing here is that when we do the preload, we do remove the old container. We still want to do that, so let's handle that. Get that out of the way, because we do want to get rid of that no matter what. Okay, now we still want to update the last container as well. So I mean, a lot of this is suspiciously the same. It's just a little bit of the render function that's a little bit different. We'll clean this up down the track, but for now I'm going to not, because I want to just keep on trucking along. Right, so we want to handle some of these different types of errors that can come our way. So if we look at the console log of the error, you can see the new data forbidden error. And if we were to go error.name, so yeah, you can see that name, that string match. So I mean, technically we could do something like if error.name equals data forbidden error. But that's a little sloppy, because we can actually we can check a little more accurately with something called instance of. So essentially what that is like some variable becomes an instance of something else. So I'll bring it up on MDN, because it never hurts to bring up the documentation, partially to catch my own mistakes, but also to give you an idea of where the hell all this information comes from, because I can tell you it doesn't all come from the back of my head. So the whole idea of instance of, and you can see an example right here, is just to check whether a variable is an instance of a particular class. And we're not using classes super heavily, but there are a number of things that just are classes. But either way, see, you can see this is actually a function, so it's not quite as cut and dried as all that, just because of the way JavaScript's weird and wonderful object system works, and I'm not going to go into that. But either way, this instance of function can be kind of useful unless you're looking to sort of do duck typing and inheritance sometimes, but I'm sort of getting ahead of myself. Instance of will give us a way to check whether something is what it says it is. So what we can do instead of doing an equality check with name is we can do instance of error, instance of data forbidden error. And then we can do something specific for it, such as sorry, my microphone's in the way of me now. Anyway, so if we put there a 403 error, and we will also render out the error. Let's render out the error. Error dot to string. That would be interesting. Yeah, we'll just turn it into a string and see how that looks. Okay, so what's the next type of error? We want to handle data not found. So if there's a data not found error, we will do a 404 error. And otherwise, we will do this unspecified error. And every single time, we are going to do an error to string, which should coerce out something that's a bit more readable. Okay, So now that we've handled these cases, and yeah, I know it's a bit verbose, but I don't actually mind it in here. Like, it makes sense. For error handling code, sometimes verbose is what you need. So here we should get ourselves a data not for, yep, so here we go. Data forbidden error. This entry could not be accessed. But it's still, for some reason, in it failed the instance of check. So we'll have to figure out why that is. This entry could not be accessed. I'm just going to do a test on instance of. Maybe I do have to check check the name. So it might be unfortunate, really. I might have to refer to my notes because I have made this work like I'm expecting it to before. And then error.name. There we go. False. There is no name on it for some reason. Okay. It's interesting. And for some reason there's not a name on it either. Even though there should be a public name on it. But maybe that's because it's not the instance. Let's keep on looking into things. So the name is data forbidden error, and this is all correct. New data forbidden. Oh, that's interesting. So for some reason it's a class of error, and it'll probably come up as an instance of error. That's funny. So let's just check that as well, because I reckon data forbidden error, instance of error will probably return true. In which case, I'm being made into a fool here. Yeah, okay. So it's true there. So that means it thinks it's a class of error, not data forbidden error. I kind of don't want that. So let me just check my notes. You know, previous time when I've implemented something a bit like this. And I'll just see whether there was some sort of weird and wacky JavaScript stuff that I was doing to sort this out. Well, it looks like in that code I just gave up and referred to the name. There might be something else going on here. Like I'm not super concerned about it, to be perfectly honest. If instance of doesn't work, I'm more than happy to just revert to error.name. It's not ideal. I would prefer to have the right type, but if I don't have the right type, I will be happy with this, because in the end of the day, this is just an error boundary. And at the worst case scenario, it ends up down here, and then I would call it an unspecified error because it means that I haven't expected it. I haven't dealt with it in any case, so it's fine for it to just crash. So if we do things now, after that change, okay, so we now got data forbidden error. And if we go to, say, entry no found, we can have our 404 error. Oopsie daisy. Oh yeah, well that one wasn't found because there is no path for that one. So if we go to this one, we should get a good route. That's good. And if we go to this one, we should get a forbidden page render. Or it comes up as an unspecified error, but that's only because we haven't dealt with it in our render error function. So let's deal with that now, just so that we're not leaving any loose ends here. So if params code equals 403, then we'll go 403 forbidden error. Now if we refresh that, we should be good. Alrighty-o. Pardon me. Okay, so if we refer back to our drawings, our pretty pictures, we have essentially dealt with So we have dealt with route no match. We've got a 404 in that case. We have dealt with this, we have dealt with this, we have dealt with this. All of those propagate to our error container. So we are all gravy there. So where do we go now? We are now... Actually, there is one thing we are not dealing with, and it's this one right here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put an error into one of our view functions. Let's make it the about page. So I'm just going to put in some random letters here, and TypeScript will obviously tell me, no, what are you doing? Because it doesn't make sense. But it will still output it because TypeScript's nice like that. Like, it'll still let me write the code, it just won't approve it. So you can see the app still runs, but if I click on about, you can see something bad happens here. All well and good. And that something bad happens in this part of the code right here. So what we can do is we can give ourselves a try catch. And if something happens there, I am really oversimplifying this. Remember, we believe that anything that happens in here should be programmer error. Okay, so we should be fine to catch it like this and just do that. Now, we will eventually simplify this, but I'm just dealing with all the cases so that we can eventually simplify down to something which is a far better solution. But I mean, there's only so simple we'll be able to get this. Anyway, you can see this error, and this could be any error, right? This reference error just happens to be the one that I threw because I'm trying to reference something that doesn't exist. But there's a lot of different errors I could eventually run into. But this should hopefully catch ourselves out when we just straight up break the code, right? And what if we were to put in our, just to make sure that everything still works, let's say we take this view, I know I'm doing some excessive duplication here, but again, I'm not too concerned about it. For learning purposes, this is fine. So we've got ourselves our route return, or it's not the word I'm looking for. We've got ourselves a way to fix this up and get back out of the unspecified error place. So the reason why we want to do this is we want to be sure that our app still works after this error happens. And you can see I can pick things back up and I can go somewhere else. I can go back home. I can go to entry free. Go back home. I can go to about. This will have a crash in the actual code, okay? But I can still get back out. Now that crash, that error, it probably makes sense to output that into the console because as a developer, I sort of don't want to just find out about it here. I want to find out about it here in this spot here. And we can do that pretty straightforward. We'll do console error in this case, and we'll just output the error straight to it. We could do something smarter down the track, but as said, that's pretty much the mantra here. We don't have to be smart straight away. We can defer being smart, because it turns out trying to be smart too soon makes you dumb. Okay, so here we go. We've got that error that's outputting here, but it's also outputting here, and we've still got a responsive application. It still does what we're asking it to do, which is good. Okay, so now, if we go back here, we have now dealt, random stuff falling off my table, we have now dealt with that one there. So now I don't know, because this is kind of a weird problem to deal with, but hopefully we'll get it knocked over. We've got 10 minutes left, so maybe we'll get this preload scenario sorted out. I might do a commit first, and then we'll go from there. Okie dokie. So, day 4, add error handling to routing. Routing and then we're gonna go, so it's at match, preload, and render steps. Okay, so now what we're going to be looking at, so when we go into this update view component here, when we go through this, we've got this, we're storing the state of what the current location is on the router state, which is this object just up here, this object here, let's find it. Yeah, router state. So last container, loaded location, last container. Now, what's the best way to say this? So when we're in this code, there is a point where suddenly we no longer have this synchronous behavior, and that is essentially from view params onward. Okay, so this code here could execute too late, and so just going back really quickly, demonstrating the problem. If I click on entry 1 and entry 2, entry 1 continues to do the thing even though I've clicked on entry 2. And what we want it to do is to not execute anymore, or at least know that its time has passed. It's, your old news. Move on. Okay? We don't want to render that particular route anymore. We've moved on from it. So what we can potentially do is figure out how we're going to sort of invalidate that. And we could potentially just do, I'm sort of tempted to just do the most naive thing here and eventually deal with it in a better way. So the danger is only when we're in this chunk of code here. Once we're beyond this chunk of code, we are good. Or rather, like if we abort before, then it's all good. It's only during this chunk of code that it needs to be aware of it needs to be aware. So I'm going to make it really clear that this is where the async loading period starts. Because this is where we deal with the fact that this might be old news by the time by the time this preload happens. Once we get into the then or the error, it might be a moot point. We don't care about the result of it anymore. So how are we going to deal with this? So we know that if the location is the same as the loaded location, nothing changes. So that's all good. What we need to know is if something is no longer current. And what we could potentially do is if we get current location, yes. So current location, this lives within this execution of update view. So here is a concept of what's called a closure, I guess. And I think I'll demonstrate this just by dropping a debug. I don't have to do it here. I can do it in, I'll drop a debugging statement in my code here. And I'll try and demonstrate what it is precisely I'm talking about. So I want to, if I'm looking at Webpack here, it should give me, it's given me access to my entire source, which is good. So what I want to do is I'm going to put something just in there inside this preload. I'm just going to put a breakpoint. I don't think we haven't actually done any debugging here before. So this is a good opportunity to explain how you use Chrome's browser to step through the code. And I might have enough room. I might have to just let me drop. Yep. Just zoom it out a bit. Okay. So if you go to sources, and you can find your, we've got a source map that essentially pulls out all our code into this Webpack URL here. And what we can do is we can drop in breakpoints that stop the code so that we can step through it step by step and see what the hell's going on, and even alter some variables at runtime as well. So it can be kind of useful. Well, I mean, it's not kind of useful. It is extremely useful, especially if you don't know what's going on with your code. So it's very useful, and we're going to use it right now. So you'll notice that it's not running, and then only when it got to the end of that preload did that code run. Now, if we look here in scope, we'll see this concept of closure. Okay, it's a very important concept because inside this update view function, we'll see various variables, and they do not go away until all of this code in this sort of this function block, this closure, finishes executing. And it's a very interesting thing if we were to say, if I back off, I took away that breakpoint. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on entry 1 and entry 2 real fast, and we're going to see something very interesting. Just as an aside, this is the 5-minute warning, so if there are any questions out there, please throw them into the chat. I have Chrome on, it should behave itself. So if you have any questions, please throw them my way. Anyway, back to what I was saying. So I clicked entry 1 and entry 2 real fast, right? So both of those things are coming. Now here, we're in the closure for entry 1. And that closure is essentially this one-time run of the update view function where entry 1 was called. That is the scope we're in. And we have a current location that equals /entry/entry1. And that's because when we did this assignment right here, or this assignment here, or this assignment here, when we did that, what we did is we put this string, it actually made a copy of this string and attached it to the name current location. I am oversimplifying, but it is for the purpose of for illustration's point. So it attached a copy of it and put it here. So it doesn't matter if this changes in another version of this function, and we'll see this in a moment, because there is another version of this, there is another closure of this function. So if I click forward, we're now going to see the other one. And what have we got here? We've got entry 2 in that closure. But we full well know that this code executed before, well before this timeout. But this means that we can use it to our advantage. Because we know that that code is different, we could do something with it. We could say, we could do one last check right down here. So if current location, because this is in the closure, if current location does not equal window.location.pathname, it now means we no longer need this route. It's old news. And we can figure out how to sort of get out of things. And like what we probably don't want to do is we don't want to discard this router anymore because we know that this route is old news. What we want to do is essentially abort what we're doing and take the new view container and get rid of it. That's pretty much it. So how about we do that? We go new view container dot parent node dot remove child new view container, and then we return. We're done. Okay. Even if there's an error, we're sort of done. We don't wanna hear about it. That said though, what we might do real quick is we'll chuck that error up here. And that way we're guaranteed to at least see it in the console, even if we don't get the actual page, right? Right. So maybe this simple and naive approach might actually do the job for us. Let's see that. I might have missed something, but it might actually do what we want it to do. All right. So if I click entry 1, entry 2. Okay, you can see there it did not ever actually load entry 1. And what we might do, just to make the timing of this really clear, I'll put in a console log for the discard. Okay, so discarding and put that here as well. And what I'll also do is put a console log right where it's starting up this whole process. Just did that 2 different ways. All right. Okay, so you can see here the initiating load of route entry 2, and then it was finished. Actually, we'll put a couple more console logs just to make it even clearer, because I know that asynchronous code can really be confusing. Okay, now we've got all the console logging I want. Okay, so if I reload that, you'll see we've got a rendering of route. So initiating load of route, rendering of route. Okay, we do home, it's going to happen immediately because there is no timeout on that one. If we go to about, we've got our error, our delayed error. We still rendered that route of about, we just rendered an error page, right? We'll go back home, initiating load of route, rendering of route. Now if I click entry 1, entry 2, you can see it initialized both. It discarded entry 1 and rendered route 2, which is kind of what we want. Like, we could eventually do something more tricky if there's a big request happening to get that data in, but otherwise I feel like that is sufficient, especially because we've hit our hour. So what I'm going to do now is I might actually I'll keep the console logs in for this commit, even though I'll most likely remove them eventually and figure out a better solution for logging that's not quite so noisy, because I just want them in this commit so that anyone who's reading the code can sort of see it. So what we'll do is we'll finish it there, wind up there. So we've got ourselves day 4, deal with stale routes by checking current location before render, current location after preload. As an aside, I'm just kind of curious whether it deals with back properly. Yep, it discarded it. So that's not too bad either. That's kind of what we wanted. Yeah, it's not, like, as I said, it's not a complete solution, but it is a solution. I'll even leave that error in there just for good measure, because it really doesn't matter. Okay, so that pretty much wraps us up for our hour. So any questions in chat, please feel free to let me know. I'll give it a minute, and then we'll go from there. As usual, if you want to take a proper look at this code, you can find the lot in github.com/weareoffsider/weekendswebapp, and we should be able to see our commits right there. You can see there, day 4. We also tag them. You can see on releases here, you can see all the days, and I'm going to be putting day 4 in here in just a moment after I do the description and stuff like that. And you can essentially reset to any particular day just by clicking on the commit or by checking out that particular day when you're in the code. So yeah, this code is always available for you to take a look at and do whatever it is you want with it. It's got an MIT license. Eventually there will be copyrighted material in it, such as when the actual the application is made. But the idea is the actual code, the concepts, all that sort of thing, you're free to use. So go hog wild, build your own web app off this base if you want, as we go through it. That's pretty much it. No cues for tonight, so thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow, Wednesday at 8 PM Australian Eastern Standard Time. Take it easy.